Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the lecture on emotions. So today, what we're going to be doing is we'll be try to keep it relatively short because I want you to really listen to this Hidden Brain podcast. So I put the link on D2L. This podcast, the episode name is called Decoding Emotions. And so this portion of the talk or this portion of the lecture will be relatively short because I really want you to go ahead and listen to the podcast because I think it's a good kind of counterpart to what we have in the book. Anyways, I think it was pretty interesting. So let's get on with it. So what are emotions? I think we all kind of understand what emotions are. We express them, we feel them, we sense them, but more kind of more deliberately or more operationalized. Emotions are brief, specific responses, and these responses are both psychological and physiological to a meaningful event or to a goal or something. The difference between emotions and other things, such as moods or emotional disorder, is that emotions typically only last a few seconds or a few minutes. Those are relatively brief in time. They don't really last for hours. They definitely don't last for days. So when something kind of persists for days, we call that more mood. And then when it becomes weeks and then months and then years, then it almost becomes it can be considered up to a certain point an emotional disorder. So there are a few components of emotions that we need to consider. So first of all is the appraisal. That means that the evaluation of the initial appraisal of the emotion. This it is usually quite quick. And then we usually evaluate that as the appraisal is either a relatively quick positive emotional feeling or relatively quick a negative emotional feeling. So the evaluation is quick, and then it either usually tending toward the positive or the negative feeling. And then after that quick evaluation or quick appraisal, we usually kind of go into a refined assessment, whether where we kind of engage in people's intentions or attributions or snap judgments or whatever heuristics, where we transform the initial assessment into a slightly, kind of a more fine-tuned part of the positive emotions. For example, sympathy might be a more refined part of a positive emotion. There's also a physiological response. So this is related to your body's physiological response to the emotion. So usually a lot of emotions are linked to some kind of physiological response. Rather when you're ashamed or when you're stressed, you start sweating. Red face when you're somewhat embarrassed, or you can feel your ears getting really, really hot when you're embarrassed, and so on. So physiological responses are usually linked to emotions in some way, somehow. There's also the expressive nature of the behavior of the emotion. So this is, expressing facial expressions. This is nonverbal behavior. So if I'm sitting back and I tilt my head, obviously that's very different than if I lean forward and I, stare at you. And so these are the expressive components of the emotions. And then there's the subjective feeling. We feel emotions, we sense emotions, we experience emotions. So this is the awareness, whether unconscious or conscious, of the experience the emotion is giving us. And oftentimes we use metaphors to kind of qualify the subjective feeling. So the weight of guilt. We feel that guilt is very heavy on us. Obviously, it's not literally heavy, but we feel it. That's a way of qualifying our feeling of guilt. Another kind of metaphor we use is, a broken heart. So when we feel rejection, when we are rejected, or when we break up, and when an important interaction or important relationship is broken up, we literally feel hurt. Now, we're not hurt. We haven't been physically hurt, but we feel hurt. So anyways, all these things, all these ways of subjectively qualifying the way that we experience emotions is another component. And then the last component are these action tendencies. So action tendencies refers to the concept of, this kind of enables or activates some kind of, or facilitates some kind of behavior. So there's in this case, these action tendencies are adaptive value of emotions, in the sense that emotions make us behave certain ways, or they encourage us to behave in a certain way, or they encourage to kind of follow up with something. So if I feel fear, then I will likely run. So if I feel fear and just not do anything, then it's kind of useless. So fear is kind of like the impetus or the activation of you should be doing something because you're afraid right now. You should get out of the situation, or you should fight. And so this is the action tendency component of emotions. Unfortunately, most of the action tendencies have been on negative emotions up until now. At the later part of the talk, we'll talk about how actually relatively new theory, broaden and build theory, actually has focused mainly on positive emotions. That'll be later. And so there are two main kind of camps in emotions, where do emotions come from, what's the ideology, and where they stem from, and so on. The first and the most common probably approach is the evolutionary approach. And so the evolutionary approach of emotions indicates that, or suggests that, emotions are biologically based behavioral adaptations meant to promote the our survival and the reproduction of our species. And so it's kind of like this belief in a just world of sorts. If they are, that means that they must exist for a reason. And emotions have evolved, or we have evolved with emotions to kind of help us through our survival and through our reproduction. And so these physiological responses to emotions are key because they help us communicate, they help us interpret, they help us kind of navigate the social world. And this, apparently, if emotions are kind of, stem from an evolutionary perspective, they should be cross-culturally universal, in the sense that if you believe that emotions or part of the emotions are universal or kind of stem from evolutionary approaches, then they should be across every human on this planet. The other perspective is cultural approaches, where, cultural approaches or emotions are slightly more socialized or socially constructed. And so how we speak with emotions, or how we speak about emotions, how we conceive emotions, how we construe emotions, are mostly or mainly construed or kind of constructed through our culture or through our cultural experiences. So here, in the cultural approaches perspective of emotions are influenced by the views of the self, the social values, and the social worlds that we live in. And those obviously vary from culture to culture, from context to context, and therefore emotions are not universal in that sense. Therefore, emotions in this cultural approach should be expressed in different ways in different cultures, and they're much more context dependent. And so those are the two kind of yin and yang, I guess. You can either believe one, or you can either believe the other, or you can believe that, there's a combination of both. Now, the reason why I'm keeping this short, and I want you to listen to the second, or to the episode, the podcast episode, is because the podcast episode does a great job of explaining and kind of talking about the cultural approaches of emotions, and how we think that anger is, we think that, we've been kind of taught in social psychology or in psychology that, there's universal kind of emotions, and that everyone lives them and everyone expresses them in the same way. And this podcast really kind of dives a little bit deeper into where and how much of that is actually true. So today, however, we'll kind of look into, what are the foundations of the evolutionary approach, and then, what are the foundations of the cultural approach. And so one argument that we use for the evolutionary approach is that emotional responses, well, both have their merit, first of all, and so both can explain certain parts of emotions. So emotional responses may be either an innate component of us, biologically kind of determined part of us, and in that case, they would be in each of a human's DNA. Therefore, they should be universal. But the cultural approaches indicate that, there might be different accents or different, kind of tweaks or different display rules depending on how the universal emotions are displayed in different contexts. And so, stemming from Darwin and the emotional expression, Darwin suggested this principle of serviceable associated habits. So Darwin's theory was that human emotions derive from motivations and displays that were evolutionary advantageous for our mammalian and primate ancestors. And so he's thinking that, well, first of all, emotions are universal. Second of all, all humans have the same facial muscles, all normal, typical kind of humans. Obviously, if you're born with a defect, it's slightly different, but all kind of humans are born with the same facial muscles and facial structure. And therefore, since humans have evolved, according to Darwin, from other mammals or recent mammals, most recently the primates, then we should share similar kind of emotions with these other close species. One argument that's used to kind of support this idea of universal emotions is that blind individuals, so people who have blind from birth, they don't see the cultural components of cultural displays of emotions. They hear them obviously and they sense them, but they don't see them with their eyes. But they still show similar facial expressions as those who are who have seen who have been brought up or who were brought up seeing social cues. And so are facial expressions universally recognized cross-culturally? Some people say that if you show these expressions to many people, for example, people from Papua New Guinea who apparently have never seen Westerners, they will recognize that the person on the left, so the lady on the left, was relatively happy or kind of, definitely positive. And the lady on the top right is definitely more on the negative or on the sad. Whereas us as Westerners who have seen them, the Papua New Guineans, I'm not sure how people who live in Papua New Guinea, we can kind of also differentiate these different facial expressions. And so that's one claim of because we can recognize other people from around the world and we've never been exposed to these people, therefore facial expressions may be somewhat universal. Other people have said that, other primates or humans or primate expressions are similar to humans. Therefore, maybe, they are kind of, biologically based. For example, humans display anger very similarly to primates and to threats and so on. When people or when chimpanzees are playing, they have a kind of like this open mouth, kind of relaxed, kind of almost laughing expression that's kind of similar to humans. And then human embarrassment resembles some of the other social animals. Now, this is my dog. This is you. If I ask you, what is she portraying? What emotion is she portraying? You might come up with something. If I ask you this, what emotion is she portraying now? And then if I ask you what emotion is she portraying now, I mean, we have a tendency of projecting emotions on non-human animals. Obviously, dogs are very sociable, and we know that they're very kind of they like interaction. Now, is my dog on the right on the last picture? She did something she wasn't supposed to do, and that's the expression she gave me. Can we say that my dog is embarrassed, that my dog feels guilty? And in the middle one, is my dog happy? I don't know. I mean, but some people would say, well, because we're mammalian, because we come from this mammalian genetic stand, we share these kind of similar expressions and maybe even these similar emotions. I just know that when I'm mad, my dog does that face. So whatever emotion it is, she walks away, which is probably, somewhat of a good stimulus and reaction or stimulus and cause. Whether that's actually guilt or not, I don't know. I'll let you kind of, feel it out. So are facial expressions innate? They may be innate. And one of the arguments that we use is that, again, blind people or people blind from birth and sighted athletes show similar facial expressions of pride after winning competition. So, we can't say that blind people learn to smile or to grin their teeth or to have their eyebrows kind of go up because they've never seen that. They can only feel it. So that's one of the reasons why we think maybe certain facial expressions or certain facial expressions may be innate and kind of ingrained in us and hardwired in us. But the counter argument is that are we just kind of using this confirmation bias that we all know we have? And so are we cherry picking this example as as an argument and as a rationale for why facial expressions may be innate. I don't know. This is where the discussion is, and I think it's just worth kind of thinking about how this is an example of me cherry picking something that confirms confirms our idea that facial expressions are innate. It may be trite, it may be right, it might be true, it might be wrong. Who knows? So the impact of, or the argument that facial expressions are maybe innate is logical, and we have to be careful with the arguments that we use to confirm or to validate or to kind of prove that that idea. So let's switch now to culturally the cultural aspects of emotional expression. So cultural expressions sometimes, or when we use a cultural approach, we think of or we talk about focal emotions. And focal emotions are especially common in a particular context or a particular culture. So we speak more of, well, this is an emotion that is specific to the socialization process that happens in the social group or amongst these people. So societies with a culture of honor, which is basically, a high value in protecting their pride and protecting their individuality, they tend to express more anger when they're insulted than people who have less of a culture of honor. And so when you insult someone in the southern U.S., they might be much more aggressive or counteract much more aggressively because there's a social kind of phenomenon of culture and honor in the southern U.S. versus in Canada, we're much more polite. We'd be, oh, sorry for it, whatever. We'd say sorry, for example. Cultural approaches also speak of culture and the ideal emotions in that context because, again, stemming from the social values, stemming from the social kind of fabric that the culture kind of builds or kind of constructs, there are certain emotions that promote social interactions or positive social interactions or positive social cohesion, and there are certain emotions that might not lend to the social cohesion. So this is where we have this theory of affect valuation, where we tend to value or promote emotional ideals or cultural ideals that are valued, that play a prominent role in the social lives of individuals. So, for example, being accommodating to others in interdependent cultures or interdependent contexts is much more valued and much more important than being kind of like, a unique and kind of a show-off. Finally, there is the cultural display rules. So sometimes it literally is do you display what emotions do you display, or how do you display certain emotions? And again, these are culturally specific rules that are governed by social norms, culture, heritage, traditions, and so on, that govern how, when, and to whom you can express which emotions and how you express these emotions. So we'll finish with what good or positive emotions. We know that negative emotions in general are more impactful. They generally help us kind of thwart a threat, or at least be attentive to threat so that we can react and kind of do something about it. So then what happens with positive emotions? Why do we feel happiness? Why do we feel contentment? Why do we feel, and it's only kind of relatively recently, in about, I'd say in the late 1990s, that, psychologists, especially social psychologists, have started looking into positive emotions. Like, why do they exist? Do they have any benefits? And what's going on, type of deal. So one of the kind of prominent researchers in this field is Barb Fredrickson. And here's what she did. Or basically, the theory of broaden and build theory is that negative emotions have a purpose of narrowing the responses, of narrowing sort of giving you tunnel vision to focus on the threat, to focus on to limit your options of things to do, so that you could deal with the threat or deal with the next situation more accurately or more focused. Think of an athlete, elite athlete. When they're a professional or whatever, Olympic slalom skier, when they're up there, they're focusing on very, very finite, extremely detailed things, because that's all their energy has to be focused on that thing. So they might be a little bit more stressed, a little bit more tense. They might be extremely tunnel vision for that thing. Just like the traditional or proverbial kind of like when a saber-toothed tiger appears in the jungle, you don't want to be kind of flaky and kind of thinking about all your options. You want to be thinking about running as fast as you can and the best kind of exit strategy. Positive emotions, on the other hand, do the opposite. So the broaden and build theory proposes that positive emotions are actually there to open up your mind and to widen the range of your attention, widen your range of thoughts and actions, and notice things, explore things. So it's a way for you to be kind of almost to increase your curiosity and to open up to things, to the situation, and so on. So in this context, the broaden and build theory proposes that in the short term, positive emotions are not necessarily required or useful for the survival of the species. However, positive emotions are much more useful or required for the kind of, the progression and for the expansion of the species, because they provide a mindset that promotes kind of like innovations and kind of curiosity and so on. And so the basically the theory proposes that what's the use of negative emotions and what's the use of positive emotions. And so to test this theory, Frederickson and her colleagues showed video clips that were either positive, which showed amusement and kind of fun stuff, or negative emotions, which was an anger-inducing video, or a neutral video. So they had 3 types of videos, and then they asked a participant to either pick which of the 3 were, or which of the 2 bottom figures were more similar to the top figure. So the participants that were so if you picked the this combination, you're mainly focusing on the square. So you're saying, oh well, this is similar because of the square. However, if you picked the other component, or the pair where there are 3, you're not looking at the individual units within the graph or whatever, or the image. You're looking at, well, here's 3 here, and then here's 3. So you see how if you're using a narrow focus, you are focusing on the units, and then if you're using slightly more broader focus, then you are using a little bit more broader kind of attention. And then they also asked participants, to after they asked them to do all these kind of which figure is similar to the top figure, then they asked them, okay, so we're just interested in knowing what you'd like to do next. Like, tell me things that you would like to do kind of next. And then they rated these next things according to the positive and negative affect, or positive and negative actions. And it turns out that participants who were brought, the more participants saw the broader perspective, the more they wanted to do kind of amusement-related activities, or content or happy activities, and the more they were tended to look at the narrow aspects of the task, the more they wanted to do slightly more anxious or kind of nervous-related components and anger-related components. And so the take-home message is that positive emotions, such as fun and amusement and contentment, can lead to the broadening of the attention scope, or the broadening of the attention kind of span, and in terms of thoughts, in terms of actions, and also in terms of building your own personal resources. Because if you think outside the box, if you think a little bit outside of yourself, then you can include other people, you could think of different things to do, and you could be a little bit more broad speaking, or kind of big picture thinking. And so I highly recommend that you have a listen to the Hidden Brain podcast, Decoding Emotions, which I might recommend. Like I said, the link is on Brightspace. And then also, I want you to realize that we really there's so much more information in the chapter. So make sure that you read the chapter, because we only skimmed we only did a little bit of the information from the chapter. So make sure you cover a lot more information in the chapter about emotions. And with that, we will see you soon. Bye.